Hello, my name is Tia, also known as Costume Fiend, because I'm both evil and excessively fond of dressing up. This is kind of a different approach to how I'd usually do this, mostly because The Road to El Dorado is one of those movies that I enjoy in large part due to nostalgia, but can also understand that its flaws make it a bit hard to fully say it's a perfect film. According to Wikipedia, anyway, Indigenous rights groups have stated that it has racist and sexist themes, which I can't really argue with. That being said, I do sort of think that it's fixable with a few adjustments, and that's kind of, I guess, what I'm going to ramble about today. To be clear, when I say El Dorado is flawed and to expand on what I assume the indigenous rights groups took issue with, I'm specifically talking about the sort of white savior narrative and a few bits of characterization, because the overall basic plot isn't too problematic by modern standards. I mean, you've got two friends who try to scam their way into riches by pretending to be gods. Honestly, for the most part, if I were to redo this movie, I wouldn't really change Miguel and Tulio very much. Their characterization is pretty much entirely fine. I mean, selfishly, I'd make, the fan and queerness canon and make their relationship a bit more blurry in the romance versus friendship department. I mean, DreamWorks has never been afraid to be spicier than Disney, so adding bi energy kind of feels right. Also, if you listen to the lyrics of Without Question and Friends Never Say Goodbye, and Tell Me the Energy was 100% straight there, you are wrong. I mean, Elton John does the soundtrack, people. Anyway, with that in mind, Miguel and Tulio's overall arcs could also go relatively unchanged. Miguel falling in love with El Dorado and Tulio developing a romance with Chell work, as does the ending for the most part. Honestly, the big changes would come from everyone else. What makes the movie a bit white saviory slash problematic is the fact that the indigenous characters are in a gray area of naivete. The priest seems to 100% believe these two Spaniards are gods up until he sees Miguel bleed, and the chief's belief is a little bit unclear because by the end of the movie it seems like he also figured it out, but when is unknown. I think what would fix this is just having both the chief and the priest figure out that Miguel and Tulio were full of it from the beginning and just play more into the power struggle that's clearly going on between them. I mean, like in Western societies, we see power struggles between religious leaders and kings slash royalty throughout history. I have to imagine that depending on the culture, that could be something that translate outside of Europe too. If we have these two coming in with their own agenda, it kind of prevents the whole we assume these white guys were gods simply because they look different from us thing. This also works better to me because Chell clearly sees right through them immediately. So even though with her it's kind of a scammer recognizes scammer thing, it still makes more sense if none of the three of them are fooled. The people would then naturally defer to their leaders on how to approach these strangers. And speaking of Chell, the biggest things I'd change about her are one, her costume. It's sort of a pet peeve of mine when people desexualize a female character design by making her body smaller rather than change her outfit and the camera angles. I think Chell has a body that plenty of real women have. It's just that the outfit is clearly playing into the sexy native girl trope. So honestly, I would keep her body pretty much the same and just change the outfit using the same influence that was clearly used for the background female characters. I've seen a few fan arts that leaned into the more historically accurate thing, and they look pretty good to me. I kind of used one of those designs as inspiration for the thumbnail. The second thing I'd change, and that's I think more Aztec inspired, but the second thing I'd change is more about adding something rather than taking anything away. I think Shell deserved a bit more backstory. We know she wanted to leave El Dorado for her own reasons, but we never understand what those are. Since she was totally fine with scamming her own people, it'd be kind of nice to know why, and why she didn't seem to have anyone else in El Dorado. If a woman of color is going to betray her own for white people, I think there ought to be a really compelling reason for that. Also, there's sort of a hint that she has some sort of beef with the priest, and given how creepy he is, there's many reasons that could be. If they'd got into that, she'd feel like an even more developed character and not just a love interest. Also, like I'd alluded to earlier, it'd make the OT3 fanon pairing of her, Tulio, and Miguel canon, because it totally works, and a lot of people left the movie with that impression anyway. She also clearly has some affection for Miguel too, and he's the first person to say she's attractive. That being said, going back to the chief and the priest for a moment, I genuinely can't remember if the chief's name is said in the film, but I'd just make sure that it was. I think it's Tenabuk, according to Wikipedia anyway. The priest's name, Shekel Khan, I think that's how it's pronounced, is said in the movie, so that was good. Honestly, the one other thing I'd change about the priest is probably his fate. Everything else about Road to El Dorado is fictional except for the secondary antagonist, Hernan Cortez, who was a real man, and definitely on the list of historical figures I'd argue was borderline pure evil. Him being mentioned and his inclusion in the movie in of itself isn't really a problem for me, but knowing what he did to the natives kind of makes it uncomfortable that even Sheko Khan ends up in his hands. Like, yeah, the priest was pro human sacrifice, but the priest is also fictional, and I don't know. Maybe this one is just me, but arguably he would have been better off just dying. It does make some sense, sorry, for Cortez to show up at the end so Miguel, Tulio, and Shell can make sure he doesn't find the entrance to El Dorado. But I don't think the priest really needs to be there for that to feel like a satisfying ending. Again, that could just be me. I'm not indigenous or from Latin America, so I would defer to someone else's opinion for that, assuming they think the movie's fixable at all, to be honest. But with that in mind, I feel like the movie's visuals, humor, and overall plot hold up decently enough for the modern era. It definitely had a bit of a renaissance, I think, in the last decade, because I guess, oh, it's 24 years old now. And I think those parts of it are a big reason why. It's also a movie that doesn't feel like it's just for kids. As I brought up in the beginning, DreamWorks in general has always allowed for more adult jokes and had more mature implications. So for young adults revisiting El Dorado, it's not like as if you're like revisiting Blue's Clues or something. Final thoughts. Because of colonialism and imperialism, pretty much the entire adventure movie genre is kind of really tricky to navigate. And I mean, in all fairness to the Road to El Dorado, it's not really the worst version of this. Arguably, there aren't really any non problematic adventure stories. However, with the changes I suggested, it's possible that it might make the movie more enjoyable, at least to the people whose cultures are being used as a backdrop, because arguably that's also kind of a fault of the genre. It feels like, you know, everybody's culture is being used as like a kind of a setting and not like actually putting any care into consideration to the people that live there. Um, but yeah, I'd be interested to know more people's thoughts on that and if there are more things you change or if you think it's even possible to do that at all. I think there are plenty of other movies you could do this with. I mean, maybe I'd consider like doing like how I would fix the Mummy series. That's also kind of a complicated one because it's a movie that for nostalgia reasons a lot of people enjoy, but there's also definitely stuff about that if you really think about it doesn't hold up. But other than that, leave a like if you liked, subscribe for more nerdy rambling, and as always, have a good one.